My name is Lillian, and I'm 44 years old, and the day I realized my daughter was ashamed of me broke something deep inside. I still remember standing in my tiny kitchen that morning, sunlight spilling through the window as I made my usual cup of instant coffee. It was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday, but the peace shattered when I saw a photo on social media, my daughter, Sophie, beaming in a bridal gown, surrounded by her bridesmaids. The caption read, "Can't wait to marry the love of my life in just a few weeks." My heart skipped. I hadn't received an invitation. Not even a phone call. I told myself maybe she was waiting to surprise me, or maybe the mail got delayed. I clung to those excuses because the alternative that she had purposely left me out was unbearable. Sophie and I used to be inseparable. I raised her on my own after her father, Andrew, walked out when she was 7. I worked double shifts at the local diner, serving coffee and pie to truckers and locals, just to keep a roof over our heads. Sophie used to sit in the corner booth after school, doing her homework, waiting for my shift to end. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough for me. When she got into college on a partial scholarship, I cried for hours out of pride. I sold my mother's old jewelry to help pay her tuition fees. I told myself every struggle, every late-night shift, every aching muscle was worth it because it meant my daughter would have a better life. But somewhere along the way, Sophie started to change. It began subtly, the way she'd wince when I showed up to her campus in my old sedan. The way she'd suggest we meet at cafes instead of my worn-down apartment. Then she started dating Ethan, a man from an old money family, all sharp suits and expensive smiles. He was polite enough to my face, but I always felt his judgment underneath every, "Nice to meet you, ma'am." As the wedding approached, Sophie's distance grew. She stopped calling regularly, then stopped visiting altogether. I thought it was wedding stress. I thought she was just busy. Until that morning when I realized everyone else had an invitation but me. I called her. My fingers trembled as I waited for her to answer. When she finally picked up, her voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "Hi, Mom." I tried to sound cheerful. "Honey, I saw your post. The wedding looks beautiful. I haven't gotten my invitation yet. Did it maybe get lost in the mail?" There was a pause long enough to make my stomach twist. "Mom," she sighed, "I didn't send you one." My throat tightened. "What do you mean you didn't send me one?" I don't think it's a good idea for you to come." "Why not?" I whispered. Her answer came slowly, but it hit like a hammer. "Ethan's family is very particular. They're all successful, polished people. And I just don't want anyone making assumptions about us. About me." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "Assumptions? Sophie, I'm your mother." "I know, Mom, but you don't understand how judgmental people can be. I don't want pity stares or awkward questions about, the diner or your situation. Please don't make this harder." Her words blurred together after that. I couldn't hear anything but the roaring in my ears. I wanted to scream. To tell her I had sacrificed everything so she could have this life she was now so desperate to hide me from. But I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. "I see," I managed finally. "Well, I hope you have a beautiful wedding." "Mom," she started, but I hung up before she could finish. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the counter. I sank into a chair, my chest aching. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the small stack of unpaid bills beside me. Electric, rent, credit card reminders of how hard I'd fought to survive. And now, none of it mattered, to the one person I did it all for. That night, I pulled out an old photo album. Page after page, Sophie's face smiled back at me, toothless grins, messy hair, scraped knees, homemade birthday cakes. I could still feel her tiny hand in mine, still hear her giggle when we'd dance in the kitchen to the radio. Somewhere between then and now, I'd lost her. Or maybe she'd lost herself. I didn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about how love could turn into shame so easily. How a child could grow up and forget the hands that fed her, clothed her, and held her when the world felt too heavy. The next morning, when I looked in the mirror, my eyes were swollen and red. but there was something else there: resolve. If Sophie didn't want me in her perfect little world, but I would not let her shame define me anymore. I hung up before she could finish, tears falling as I realized my own daughter thought I was an embarrassment. The next morning, I stared at Sophie's childhood photos and wondered where I had gone wrong. The morning sunlight spilled across the table, glinting off the glass frames that held fragments of our past. Sophie's gap-toothed grin at age 6, the homemade Halloween costume I stitched from old curtains, the high school graduation photo where she'd clutched her diploma and said, "We did it. Mom." Each one felt like a knife now. I ran my fingers over the glass, tracing her smiling face. Somewhere between the diner shifts and late-night homework help, between the birthday cakes and broken hearts, something had changed in her. I couldn't help asking myself, had I loved her too much? Had I made her feel like she needed to run from where she came from? When Sophie was little, she'd always tell me she wanted to make me proud. But now it felt like she wanted to erase me instead. I made myself a cup of coffee, but it went cold before I even took a sip. The apartment felt too quiet, the air heavy with memories. My best friend Denise dropped by later that afternoon. She's been my rock through every hardship, divorce, debt, and despair. One look at my face and she knew something was wrong. "Lil, what happened?" she asked softly, setting down a bag of groceries. I tried to shrug it off, but the tears came before I could stop them. "She didn't invite me, Denise. My own daughter doesn't want me at her wedding because I'm too poor." Denise's jaw tightened. "She said that?" I nodded, choking back a sob. "Not in those exact words, but she didn't have to. That's what she meant. She said she didn't want pity stares." For a long moment, Denise didn't speak. Then she muttered, "You should go anyway. Show her what she's missing. Walk right into that fancy wedding and make her face you." The thought of that made my chest ache even more. "No," I said quietly. "If she doesn't want me there, I won't force it. I raised her to have choices. This was her choice." Denise frowned. "You're too soft, Lil. You always have been." Maybe she was right. But I wasn't ready to face Sophie's rejection again, not in front of hundreds of strangers. I couldn't bear to see the look in my daughter's eyes when she pretended I didn't exist. That night I sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. Every glow in the distance reminded me of a dream I once had but couldn't afford to chase. I had spent years living paycheck to paycheck, my dreams always on hold because there was always something Sophie needed: first new shoes, tuition, a laptop, rent money. I never resented it, I was proud to do it. But it hurt, realizing she saw all of that as something to be ashamed of. I thought about the last time we were truly close. It was her college graduation. She'd asked me to stand beside her for photos, holding her cap and gown like I was the reason she'd made it. "Mom, you're my hero," she'd said that day. The words still echoed in my head, cruel now in their irony. I picked up my phone more than once that night, wanting to call her again, to ask her if she really meant it. But what good would that do? She'd made it clear. I was no longer part of the picture she wanted to show the world. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to work, poured coffee for strangers, and forced a smile while my heart quietly broke. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, but I brushed it off. Just tired, I'd say. At home, I started cleaning obsessively, dusting, scrubbing, rearranging cabinets. Maybe I thought if I made the place perfect, I'd feel less small, less left behind. But no matter how spotless the floors were, the ache stayed. Denise came over again a few nights later. She brought a bottle of wine, the cheap kind we used to drink when things got tough. "You need to stop beating yourself up," she said, pouring me a glass. "You did everything for that girl. Don't you dare feel like a failure because she lost her way." "I don't feel like a failure," I whispered, even though I did. "I feel invisible." Denise reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then it's time to stop living small. Do something for you for once. She doesn't want you there? Fine. Go build a life she'll wish she never turned her back on." Her words hit me deep. Maybe that was what I needed to stop surviving and start living. For so long, I'd been defined by sacrifice, by scraping by. But maybe it was time to prove to myself, not Sophie, that I was more than my bank balance. That night, I went to bed with a strange calmness settling over me. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "You've been through worse, Lillian. You can get through this too." In that quiet, I remembered something my mother once told me when I was a child and we'd lost our home. Pain is temporary, but pride in yourself lasts forever. The next morning, I took down Sophie's graduation photo from the wall. I wrapped it carefully in an old towel and placed it in a drawer, not because I stopped loving her, but because I couldn't keep staring at the reminder of what I'd lost. Then, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was bruised, yes, but not beaten. Somewhere beneath the heartbreak, there was still strength. I promised myself that if Sophie couldn't see my worth, I would make sure the world could. 2 weeks after that devastating call, life handed me something I never saw coming. The diner had always been my safe place, the one constant through all the chaos of my life. I'd worked there for nearly 18 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I knew every regular by name, from truck drivers to local teachers. I knew how they liked their coffee, how much cream, how many sugars. I had built a small kind of family there. That morning, I walked in like usual, hair pulled back, uniform pressed, ready to face another long shift. But something felt different. The manager, Pete, was pacing near the counter, his face pale and tense. When he called all the employees to gather, I felt a knot form in my stomach. He cleared his throat, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry, everyone. Corporate decided to shut down this branch. Effective immediately." The words hit like a punch. I stood frozen, coffee pot in hand. "Effective immediately?" I repeated. He nodded. "I wish I could give you more notice, Lillian. You've been here the longest, but there's nothing I can do." I don't know how long I stood there after that, just staring at the chipped floor tiles. 18 years. 18 years of early mornings, double shifts, burnt fingers, aching feet, and suddenly, it was all gone. By the time I got home, the shock had turned into panic. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by bills, trying to make numbers add up that simply wouldn't. My savings were barely enough for a month's rent. I was 44 years old, with no degree, no backup plan, and no one to depend on. I cried that night, not because of the job itself, but because I felt like life was confirming what Sophie had said, that I was a failure. Too poor. Too small. Too stuck. The next morning, my phone rang. The number looked familiar, though I couldn't place it. I answered hesitantly. "Hello? Lillian?" A warm, male voice said. "It's Mr. Langston from the diner." I blinked. "Mr. Langston? Oh, of course. You're the gentleman who always ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie." He chuckled softly. "That's me. I heard about the diner closing. You were always so kind to me, always remembered my order. I was wondering, how are you holding up?" The kindness in his voice caught me off guard. "I'm managing," I lied. "Well," he continued, "I might have something that could help. I own a small car restoration business. My assistant recently retired, and I could use someone reliable. It's not fancy work organizing parts, keeping records, greeting clients. You'd be great at it." I hesitated. "Oh, Mr. Langston, that's kind of you, but I don't know anything about cars." He chuckled again. "Neither did I when I started. You'd learn. Why don't you come by tomorrow and see the place?" The next day, I drove my old sedan across town to a quiet street lined with oak trees. The garage stood at the corner, an old brick building with a large sign that read "Langston Classics, restoring history one car at a time." Inside, it smelled like oil, leather, and time itself. Vintage cars filled the space, each one gleaming under bright lights. Mr. Langston was there, a tall man in his late 70s with gentle eyes and hands that looked permanently stained from years of work. He gave me a tour, explaining how he and his late wife had started the shop decades ago. "It's honest work," he said with a proud smile. Takes patience and care qualities I've seen in you. I started that same week. My first few days were awkward. I mixed up invoices, spilled coffee on a parts list, and called a carburetor a carburetor. But Mr. Langston was patient, always laughing it off. You'll get there, Lillian, he'd say. And I did. Within weeks, I was learning fast how to recognize parts, how to talk to customers, even how to buff chrome until it gleamed like new. For the first time in years, I felt useful again. Not just as a mother or a waitress, but as a woman capable of more than she'd ever believed. Sometimes Mr. Langston would tell me stories about his wife, Evelyn. She used to say the cars were like people, he told me once. You can't fix them by force. You have to understand where they've been, what they've been through. That line stayed with me. Maybe I was a bit like those cars, worn down, neglected, but still capable of shining again. Months passed. The shop became my sanctuary. I started waking up, excited to go to work. I even began saving a little money again. Mr. Langston would sometimes pat my shoulder and say, "You remind me of Evelyn, strong, steady, and kind." Then, one morning, I came in and found the shop closed. The door was locked, and a note was taped to the window. It was from his nephew. Mr. Langston had passed away suddenly during the night. I stood there in disbelief, tears spilling down my cheeks. He had become like family to me. Losing him felt like losing a piece of stability all over again. 2 weeks later, I was called to a lawyer's office. I assumed it was about final pay paperwork or the shop's closure. But when I sat down, the lawyer smiled kindly and handed me an envelope. "Mr. Langston left you something," he said. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in his handwriting. "Lillian, you gave this place life again. You reminded me of why I started. I can't think of anyone better to keep that spirit alive. The business, the building, and everything in it are now yours. Make it shine. Arthur Langston." I froze. I don't understand," I stammered. "He left me the business?" The lawyer nodded. "He did. He meant what he wrote." I walked out of that office in a daze. Me, a car restoration shop owner. It sounded absurd. But when I stood in front of that familiar brick building later that afternoon, the weight of what it meant began to sink in. This was a second chance. A new beginning. A gift from a man who saw worth in me when my own daughter couldn't. When he passed away suddenly a year later, I was stunned to learn he had left the entire business to me. Owning a car restoration business changed everything about how I saw myself. When I first opened the doors to Langston Classics as its new owner, I half expected someone to stop me to tell me there had been a mistake. But no one did. The keys were mine, the papers were signed, and the quiet hum of possibility filled that old brick building. I stood there in the middle of the shop, surrounded by half-finished cars and oil-stained floors, and whispered to myself, "You did it, Lillian. You're not just surviving anymore, you're building." The first few months were chaos. I had no experience running a business, and the learning curve was brutal. I spent late nights going through invoices, learning how to price restorations, and trying to understand every machine in the shop. I made plenty of mistakes ordering the wrong parts, double booking clients, and once accidentally spilling paint on a near-finished Corvette. But every mistake became a lesson. I refused to let fear or doubt take over. I had lived through worse. Slowly, I found my rhythm. I hired a young assistant named Trevor, a cheerful, bright-eyed mechanic who reminded me of my younger self, full of determination and energy. Together, we transformed the place. We polished the floors, updated the signage, and repainted the walls a soft cream with gold accents. I even started an Instagram page for the business, posting before and after shots of our restorations. To my surprise, it caught on fast. People loved seeing old cars brought back to life. Before long, we had clients coming in from neighboring towns, asking specifically for Lillian's touch. For the first time in years, money wasn't the enemy. I was paying off debts, building savings, and even helping Trevor pay for his evening classes in mechanical engineering. I'd come home tired but proud, hands covered in grease, but heart full of gratitude. One day, as I sat at my desk reviewing invoices, I looked at the framed letter from Mr. Langston hanging on the wall. I whispered a quiet thank you. He had believed in me when no one else did. I wished Sophie could see me now, not out of pride, but because I wanted her to know I had found strength in the place she thought I was weakest. Sometimes I'd scroll through her social media out of habit. Her life looked perfect: brunches at expensive cafes, designer clothes, her new house with Ethan. She looked happy, but not once, in all those posts, did she mention me. Not one word about the woman who raised her, or the sacrifices that got her there. It hurt, but I was learning to let that pain harden into quiet resolve instead of bitterness. I was no longer the woman who begged for an invitation. I was the woman building her own legacy. 3 months into running the business, something amazing happened. A well-known local collector stopped by after seeing one of our restorations online. He wanted me to take on a full rebuild of a 1959 Mercedes 220S. The job would take months, but the payout would be enough to secure the shop for years. I poured myself into that project. Day and night I worked on that car like it was a symbol of everything I'd lost and regained. I polished every chrome line until it gleamed like silver, stitched the leather seats myself, and made sure every inch of it told a story of care and craftsmanship. When it was finally finished, the client was speechless. He paid me double the quoted amount, saying the car felt alive again. That single job changed everything. Word spread fast, and soon I had more clients than I could handle. Trevor and I expanded the shop, hiring 2 more mechanics and turning one of the back rooms into a cozy waiting area with coffee, magazines, and framed photos of our best restorations. I remember standing in that shop one evening, after everyone had left. The sun was setting through the wide windows, painting the room in gold. I looked around and felt something I hadn't in years: peace. I wasn't just scraping by anymore. I had built something meaningful, something lasting. Sometimes I'd catch myself daydreaming about Sophie walking through the shop doors, wide-eyed with surprise, realizing her mother was not the woman she thought she had outgrown. I imagined her smile, her pride, but that was all it was: imagination. Reality was quieter. Still, I found joy in the little things: the hum of an engine after a successful fix, the laughter of my team, the glow of a freshly polished hood under the lights. One evening, Trevor looked at me as we locked up and said, "You know, Lillian, you're kind of famous around here now. People talk about you like some legend who came out of nowhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm no legend. Just a woman who got tired of being invisible." But deep down, his words warmed me. I had become someone I never thought I could be. Not rich in the traditional sense, maybe, but rich in purpose, in dignity, in self-worth. Months turned into a year. The business was thriving, and for the first time, I started thinking about treating myself to something special, a small reward for the years of sacrifice and struggle. I began browsing vintage car auctions, dreaming of owning one of my own restorations instead of just building them for others. It wasn't about showing off. It was about reclaiming pride. Every car I restored was a metaphor for my own life: battered, neglected, but capable of shining again with enough love and hard work. And I couldn't help but wonder what Sophie would think if she ever saw me behind the wheel of something beautiful. But I smiled quietly, knowing she had no idea how much my life had changed since she'd written me off. The day Sophie was getting married, I woke up to a strange calm instead of sadness. For weeks, I had dreaded that date. It loomed on my calendar like a shadow, a cruel reminder that I wasn't wanted at the most important day of my daughter's life. But when the morning finally arrived, I felt something unexpected: peace. Maybe it was acceptance. Maybe it was exhaustion. Either way, I no longer had tears left to cry. I made myself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and sat by the window with my coffee. The world outside went on as usual. Birds sang, the sun shone, and I realized the universe didn't stop because one person had turned away from me. Life went on, and so would I. Trevor showed up at the shop that morning, grinning as always. "You sure you don't want the day off, boss? You've been working non-stop." I smiled faintly. "Actually, I think I will take the day to myself today." He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "You should. Go for a drive or something." Take one of the beauties out. You've earned it. I chuckled. And which beauty are you volunteering? He motioned toward the black 1968 Mustang convertible sitting in the corner, our most recent restoration project. The thing gleamed like midnight, every curve polished to perfection. We had just finished it for a client who wasn't due to pick it up until next week. Take her out, Trevor insisted. She's too pretty to sit there collecting dust. I hesitated. The old me would have said, no, immediately afraid to scratch it, afraid to take up space. But the woman I was becoming thought, why not? So I did. I grabbed the keys, threw on my sunglasses, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The engine roared to life beneath my hands, smooth and confident. The sound alone made me smile. I hadn't felt that kind of freedom in years. I didn't plan where I was going. I just drove. The city rolled past me in a blur. Streets I'd walked for years now looked different from behind the wheel of something powerful. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt alive. As I passed through downtown, I noticed traffic slowing ahead. That's when I realized where I was, just a few blocks from St. Matthew's Church, the very place Sophie was getting married. For a moment, I froze. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every part of me screamed to turn away, to keep driving. But curiosity rooted me to the spot. I needed to see her, even if from a distance. I pulled into a parking spot across the street and sat there quietly. Through the trees and morning bustle, I saw the church entrance decorated with white roses and golden ribbons. People in elegant clothes mingled outside, laughing, posing for photos. And then, through the crowd, I saw her. Sophie. My little girl. She was breathtaking. Her gown shimmered in the sunlight, delicate lace tracing her shoulders. She looked every bit the princess she had always dreamed of being. I should have felt proud. I should have felt joy. But instead, a lump rose in my throat, a mix of love and sorrow so heavy I could barely breathe. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, she turned her head. Her eyes swept across the street and landed on me. For a split second, time stopped. Our gazes locked. She blinked, clearly stunned, her lips parting slightly. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I knew what I wanted her to see. Not pity, not shame, just strength. I smiled softly, gave a small nod, and then shifted the gear. The Mustang purred as I pulled away. I didn't look back. The wind rushed through my hair as I drove out of the city, the church fading into the distance behind me. There was no bitterness in my heart, only closure. If she wanted a perfect world without me in it, she could have it. But she would remember that image of me, behind the wheel of that beautiful car, not broken, not desperate, just free. By the time the sun began to set, I found myself on a quiet country road, miles away from everything. I parked by a field of wildflowers and sat on the hood of the car, staring at the sky. It was peaceful there, far from judgment and disappointment. I stayed until the stars came out. Then, reluctantly, I checked my phone. 15 missed calls. All from Sophie. My heart thudded. I hesitated before opening her messages. The first one read, "Mom, please answer." Then another, "I saw you, please talk to me." I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart torn. For years I'd longed to hear her voice. But now, I didn't know if I was ready. Did she want to apologize? Or was she just shocked to see her poor mother in a car worth more than her designer wedding gown? I turned off the phone and sat quietly for a while, watching the moon reflect off the car's polished surface. Maybe this was the start of something new, or maybe it was just another heartbreak waiting to happen. Still, when I finally turned the phone back on, one message caught my eye. It was different from the others. "Mom, I'm sorry. I need to talk to you. Please." I could almost hear the tremor in her voice through those words. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Maybe it was time. Maybe it wasn't. But whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure this time. I wouldn't let her break me. But when she texted, "Mom, please answer. I need to talk to you," something inside me shifted. I finally answered her call that evening, unsure what to expect. My hands were shaking as I pressed the green button. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy with everything left unsaid. Then I heard her voice, small, trembling, nothing like the confident woman I'd seen in her wedding photos. "Mom," I swallowed hard. "I'm here, Sophie." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I didn't think you'd answer." "I wasn't sure I should," I admitted quietly. "But you called so many times, I figured it must be important." "It is. Mom, She broke off, and I could hear her crying softly on the other end. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I sat there, frozen, listening to my daughter cry. It was the first time she had said those words to me in years. "Sophie," I whispered. "What happened?" She took a shaky breath. "Everything went wrong, Mom, everything." I waited, my chest tightening. She told me that during the reception, some of Ethan's relatives had started whispering things about her, how lucky she was to have married into money. How you can't really take the girl out of the trailer park. Words like daggers, slicing through her carefully built image. "I wanted so badly to belong," she said between sobs. "But when they said those things, it hit me that I'll never fit in with people like them. And the worst part was when I saw you, Mom. When I saw you driving that car, looking so strong, so radiant, I realized how wrong I'd been." "Sophie, no, let me say this," she interrupted quickly. "I was ashamed of where I came from because I thought it made me less. I thought if I just distanced myself from you, from the diner, from everything, I could finally be someone. But seeing you today, I realized you've always been someone. You didn't need money or fancy clothes to be worthy. I did, and I threw you away because I was too blind to see that." Her words cracked, something open inside me. I had imagined her apologies before, cold, polite, forced, but this wasn't that. This was raw. Genuine. "I don't hate you, Sophie," I said softly. "I never did. I just couldn't understand why you were ashamed of me." "I wasn't ashamed of you, Mom. I was ashamed of myself." For a long moment, we just listened to each other breathe. Then she asked quietly, "How did you afford that car? Are you okay? Are you doing well?" I smiled faintly. "You could say that. I own a business now." There was stunned silence. "You what?" "A car restoration business," I explained. "It used to belong to a dear friend, Mr. Langston. He left it to me when he passed. I've been running it for over a year now. It's been doing better than I ever dreamed." She gasped softly. "Mom?" I chuckled lightly. "A messy, wonderful journey. But I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of who I've become." I could hear her sniffle. "I'm proud of you too, Mom. I really am. I just wish I'd known sooner." "You weren't ready to see it then," I said gently. "And that's okay. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know, just not always when we expect it." We fell silent again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people finally finding each other after being lost for too long. After a while, she spoke again, her voice softer. "Can I see you, Mom? Soon? I just want to talk. Properly. No pretending. No walls." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run into her arms and pretend the past hadn't happened. But another part, the part that had built a life from ashes, knew better. Forgiveness wasn't something that could be handed out like a spare key. It had to be earned. "I want that too," I said finally. "But Sophie, I need to be honest. I can't just forget everything that happened. What you did, it hurt deeply. I need time. And I need you to show me that you mean what you're saying." "I will," she promised quickly. "You'll see. I'll make it right, Mom. I hope so." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You looked beautiful today. Seeing you behind that car? I've never been more proud. You looked happy." "I was," I said. "Because for the first time in years, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval." We both laughed a little then, through tears. After the call ended, I sat there in silence, staring at my phone. My heart felt lighter, though not completely healed. It was the beginning of something uncertain but real. I looked out at the night sky, the stars faint but steady. Maybe this was the universe's way of giving us another chance, a chance to rebuild on truth instead of pretense. I turned the Mustang's engine back on, letting its low rumble fill the silence. As I drove home, the cool night air rushing through the open window, I thought about how far I'd come from a waitress who couldn't pay her bills to a woman driving her own destiny. I didn't know what the future held for Sophie and me, but for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. As much as I wanted to forgive her instantly, I told her she'd have to show me she meant it, not just say it. A week later, Sophie invited me to dinner at her home. When her message came through, I stared at it for nearly an hour before replying. The words were simple: "Mom, can we have dinner? Just us. I'll cook." But the meaning behind them was heavy. A week earlier, she'd excluded me from her life. Now, she was asking me to step back into it. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect the fragile peace I'd built since the wedding. But the mother in me, the one who had loved her since the moment she took her first breath, couldn't ignore her. The following Friday evening, I drove across town, to her neighborhood, a place I'd never been invited to before. As I turned onto her street, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of pride and pain. The houses were elegant, lined with manicured hedges and glowing porch lights. When I pulled up in front of her 2-story home, I took a deep breath. It was beautiful, modern, grand, and a world away from the small apartment where she'd grown up. Sophie must have seen me through the window because the front door opened before I even reached it. She stood there, wringing her hands nervously. "Hi, Mom." I smiled gently. "Hi, sweetheart." She stepped aside, letting me in. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic, and something warm baking in the oven. The dining table was already set, candles flickering softly. "You didn't have to go all out," I said, taking in the scene. "I wanted to," she replied quickly. "I wanted it to feel special." For a few moments, we both just stood there, unsure of how to start. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the guilt in her eyes. But I also saw something else: hope. We sat down, and she served dinner, my favorite, chicken piccata with lemon and capers. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't care. The effort meant everything. Between bites, we talked. At first, about safe topics: her job, Ethan's work, my business. She asked questions about the shop, about the cars I restored, about how I'd learned everything. She seemed genuinely fascinated. "I still can't believe you own a business," she said with a small smile. "It's so different from how I remember you." I laughed softly. "Different good or different bad?" "Good," she said quickly. "Very good. I think I just underestimated you." I raised an eyebrow, teasing gently. "You think?" She blushed, looking down at her plate. "I know I did. I was awful to you, Mom. I keep thinking about all the things I said or didn't say. I was so focused on trying to be accepted that I forgot the one person who accepted me unconditionally." Her voice cracked on the last words. I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "You were young, Sophie, and scared. We all do foolish things when we're afraid of not fitting in." She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "That doesn't excuse it." "No," I said gently. "But it explains it." We sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of those years settle between us. The clinking of silverware and the quiet hum of the oven filled the air. It wasn't awkward, it was healing. After dinner, she insisted on making dessert. I offered to help, but she laughed nervously. "No, you sit. You've done enough cooking for a lifetime." I watched her move around the kitchen, realizing how much she resembled me in her gestures, the way she stirred, the way she hummed softly when she concentrated. Despite everything, she was still my little girl. When she returned with 2 slices of pie, she hesitated before sitting down. "Mom, there's something I need to say before I lose the courage." I nodded. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want to try to earn it. Ethan and I talked after the wedding. He feels terrible too. We both realized how wrong it was to let money and image come between us and family. I studied her face. The sincerity was there, raw and real. "I believe you," I said softly. "But forgiveness isn't a switch, Sophie. It's a process. I can't promise it'll happen quickly, but I can promise I'll try." She smiled weakly, tears threatening again. That's all I could ever ask for. When I stood to leave later that night, she walked me to the door. "Can I hug you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. The moment her arms wrapped around me, all the pain, anger and resentment seemed to melt away just for a moment. She held me tight, whispering, "I love you, Mom. I always have. I just forgot how to show it." I closed my eyes, breathing her in, the scent of rosemary and home washing over me. "I love you too, baby." She pulled back, smiling through tears. "Next time I want to see your shop. I want to see everything you've built." "I'd like that," I said. Driving home that night, I felt something shift inside me. The wound she had opened was still there, but it was beginning to heal. Her apology didn't erase the past, but it lit a path forward. As I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, replaying the evening in my mind, the awkward smiles, the laughter, the way she looked at me like she finally saw me again. The road to forgiveness wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. Driving home that night, I realized forgiveness was a journey, not a moment, and we had just taken the first step. Over the next few months, Sophie made an effort to visit me often. At first, her visits felt tentative, polite, cautious, like she was testing the waters to see if I'd really let her back in. She'd stop by the shop after work with coffee or sandwiches, saying she just happened to be in the area, though I knew she was going out of her way. I never called her out on it. It was enough to see her trying. The first time she came to Langston Classics, she walked in wearing a cream-colored blazer and high heels that clearly didn't belong anywhere near engine grease. Trevor nearly dropped his wrench when he saw her, mostly because he thought she was a customer from some magazine shoot. "Wow," she said, her eyes wide as she looked around the shop. "This place is incredible." I smiled, handing her a pair of safety glasses. "It's home." She followed me around, watching as we polished chrome and fitted parts. When I explained how we restored the interior of a 1972 Cadillac, she listened like every word mattered. For the first time in years, I saw admiration in her eyes, pure, genuine pride. "You did all this," she whispered. I nodded. "Every inch of it." From then on, she started visiting weekly. Sometimes she'd help with paperwork or organize parts. Other times she'd just sit and talk while I worked. She was curious about everything: how I handled customers, how I negotiated deals, how I managed employees. It became clear she wasn't just bonding. She was learning. One afternoon, she looked up from sorting invoices and said, "You know, I've been thinking, maybe I could help you with marketing. My background's in design, remember? I could make brochures, update your website, even run social media ads." I laughed. "My little socialite wants to manage car shop marketing now?" She grinned sheepishly. "Maybe, if you'll let me." I hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "All right, let's see what you've got." A week later, she showed me mock-ups for a new logo, sleek, modern, but still honoring the shop's vintage soul. It was beautiful. She also redesigned the website, using before and after photos and customer testimonials. Within a month, our bookings nearly doubled. Trevor teased her one day, saying, "You might put us out of work if you keep pulling in this many clients." Sophie laughed and rolled up her sleeves, smudging her perfectly manicured fingers with grease. "Then, I guess I'll have to earn my keep." Watching her laugh and banter with my team felt like watching a missing piece of my life slide back into place. It wasn't forced anymore. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was just Sophie, my Sophie. One evening, after everyone had left, she lingered in the shop, helping me close up. As we turned off the lights, she said quietly, "You know, I didn't realize how happy you looked here. You glow, Mom. You really do." I smiled, touched. "I'm proud of what I've built. But having you here, that's what makes it complete." Her eyes softened. I'm so sorry for ever making you feel less than what you are. You're the strongest woman I know. Her words hit me straight in the chest. I wanted to cry, but instead, I just pulled her into a hug. You're learning, sweetheart. That's what matters. Over the next few months, our relationship kept growing. She invited me and Trevor over for dinner one night, insisting that Ethan wanted to meet me properly. I wasn't sure I was ready, but Sophie looked so hopeful that I agreed. When I arrived, Ethan greeted me at the door, looking far more nervous than I expected. Mrs. Brooks, he said awkwardly, extending his hand. I owe you an apology. I shook his hand, smiling faintly. I think we can skip the formalities, Ethan. He nodded, his expression sincere. I judged you before I even knew you. And that's not something I'm proud of. Sophie's told me everything you've done for her. You're an amazing woman. For the first time, I saw no condescension in his eyes. Only genuine respect. It meant more than I wanted to admit. Dinner went better than I could have hoped. We laughed, shared stories, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in my daughter's world again, not because I'd changed to fit in, but because she'd opened her heart enough to make room for me. In the weeks that followed, Sophie started talking about her own regrets, how she'd lost friends and even parts of herself trying to maintain an image. She told me she'd started therapy to work through her self-worth issues. That, more than anything, made me proud. It showed she was serious about changing. One afternoon, she hugged me goodbye and said, "You know, Mom, I used to think success was about having the nicest things. But now I think it's about being surrounded by people who love you and being proud of the person you are." I smiled, my heart swelling. "Then I'd say you've finally found success." She laughed softly. "That's true. It's because I learned from the best." As she drove off, I stood outside the shop, watching the taillights fade into the distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the sting of what we'd lost. I felt the warmth of what we were building. We were healing slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. For the first time in years, I felt like a mother again, not a burden, not an embarrassment, but a woman valued for who she was. One Saturday morning, Sophie surprised me with a visit and a small box in her hands. It was one of those golden mornings when the air smelled faintly of rain, and the shop was quiet. I was halfway through polishing the hood of a '72 Camaro when I heard her voice behind me. "Hey, Mom," I turned, wiping my hands on a rag, smiling. "Well, this is a nice surprise." "You're up early." She grinned, her cheeks slightly flushed from the morning chill. "I wanted to catch you before you got too busy. I have something for you." She held out a small white box tied with a silver ribbon. My first instinct was to laugh. "What's this? Did I miss a holiday?" She shook her head, her smile faltering into something softer. "No occasion. Just gratitude." Curious, I untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single engraving. "To the woman who never gave up." I froze, staring at the words. My throat tightened, and tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "Oh, Sophie," I whispered. "It's beautiful." She smiled nervously. "I saw it and thought of you. I know I can't undo the past, Mom, but I want you to know I see you now for who you really are. Strong, kind, brave. Everything I hope I can be someday." I stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. "You're already on your way, sweetheart." That moment was quiet but powerful. It wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol, a bridge mending the years we'd lost. We spent the rest of the morning together at the shop. Sophie helped me wash one of the cars, laughing when the hose splashed her by accident. Trevor walked in, shaking his head. "Didn't think I'd see the boss's daughter doing manual labor." She smirked, flicking a bit of water at him. "Guess there's a first time for everything." The shop echoed with laughter, and for the first time, it truly felt like home, not just for me, but for us. Later, as we took a break, Sophie leaned against one of the cars and said, "Mom, I've been thinking about doing something special. For us, for family." I looked at her curiously. "Oh? I want to throw a little get-together," she said. Nothing fancy. Just a picnic at the park. You, me, Ethan. Maybe Trevor if he wants to come. I want to make up for all the moments we missed. I want to start creating new memories. My heart softened. That sounds perfect. We picked a date the following weekend. When the day came, the sun was bright, the sky cloudless, and the park full of families. Sophie had packed everything herself. Sandwiches, fruit, lemonade, even a pie she'd baked from scratch. As we spread out the blanket under a large oak tree, I looked around at the simple beauty of it all. No chandeliers, no designer gowns, no fancy speeches, just laughter, love, and sunlight. Ethan joined us later, carrying a basket and a sheepish grin. I brought dessert, store-bought, don't judge me. Sophie rolled her eyes, but her tone was playful. You're lucky you're cute. He laughed and set the basket down before turning to me. Lillian, thank you for coming. And thank you for giving us another chance. Sophie's been happier these past few months than I've ever seen her. I smiled warmly. We're all learning, Ethan. That's what matters. The afternoon was perfect. We played board games, took silly photos, and reminisced about old times. Sophie made a point of asking about my childhood stories I hadn't told her in years. At one point, she reached over, holding my hand. I missed this, Mom, just being together. So did I said softly. As the sun began to set, the park emptied slowly, but we stayed, watching the sky turn gold and pink. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder, sighing contentedly. You know, she said, I used to think family had to look perfect to be happy, but now I think happiness is what makes family perfect. I smiled at that. You're starting to sound wise, you know that? She laughed. I get it from my mother. We packed up as the first stars began to twinkle. Before leaving, Sophie handed me a framed photo Ethan had taken earlier that day. It was of me and her, laughing mid-conversation, unaware of the camera. I want you to have it, she said softly. It's the first real picture of us in years. No posing, just us. I looked at the photo and felt my heart swell. The woman in it wasn't the heartbroken mother from months ago. She was happy, confident, whole. That night, when I got home, I placed the picture on my bedside table beside the bracelet. They were reminders not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd regained. Life had a funny way of circling back when you least expected it. I thought I'd lost my daughter forever, but here she was showing up, growing up, and giving me something I never thought I'd have again. Peace. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how far we'd come. But deep down, I sensed that life wasn't done testing us yet. I didn't know how or when, but I could feel it. The peace we'd built was precious but fragile. But I didn't know life was about to test our bond again in a way neither of us expected. A few weeks later, I received a call that froze my heart. Sophie had been in an accident. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was at the shop finishing paperwork when my phone rang. The number flashing on the screen was one I didn't recognize. But something in me, some motherly instinct, told me to answer. Hello? I said, half distracted. Is this Mrs. Lillian Brooks? A man's voice asked urgently. I'm calling from St. Luke's Hospital. Your daughter, Sophie Miller, has been in a car accident. Everything around me went silent. The world stopped spinning. What? I whispered, gripping the edge of the desk. Is she alive? She's alive, the man said quickly. But she's in critical condition. You should come right away. I don't even remember locking up the shop or getting into my car. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The drive to the hospital felt endless, every red light like a cruel delay. I kept praying under my breath, please God, not my daughter. Not now. Not after we just found each other again. When I burst through the emergency room doors, I must have looked frantic because a nurse rushed to help me. I'm here for my daughter, Sophie Miller, I gasped. She led me down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fear. The sound of beeping monitors echoed off the sterile white walls. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When we reached her room, I stopped in the doorway. Sophie lay in the hospital bed, pale and bruised, hooked up to wires and IVs. Her beautiful face, my baby's face, was barely recognizable. A bandage wrapped around her forehead, and her right arm was in a cast. "Mom." Ethan's voice came from the corner. I turned and saw him, eyes red and swollen. He looked utterly broken. "She's stable now, but it was bad. A truck ran a red light. She didn't even see it coming." I covered my mouth, a sob escaping before I could stop it. I walked to her bedside and gently took her hand. It was cold but still warm enough to remind me she was alive. "She'll be okay," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "She has to be." Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "She's been unconscious since the accident, but the doctors said she's strong. They're hopeful." I stayed by her side that entire night. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor became my lullaby of terror and hope. I talked to her softly, telling her stories, memories of when she was little, of the time she'd fallen asleep on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. "Remember when you were 6, I whispered, brushing a stray hair from her forehead, "and you made me promise that no matter what, I'd never stop believing in you? Well, now I need you to keep that promise, baby. You fight, you come back to me." The nurses offered to bring me a cot, but I refused to leave the chair beside her bed. Every time the monitors beeped irregularly, my heart seized. Around dawn, as the first light of morning spilled through the window, Sophie stirred. I froze, holding my breath. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, and then she let out the softest groan. "Sophie?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Honey, can you hear me?" Her lips moved slightly. "Mom?" I choked out a sob of relief. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm right here." Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "You came." I squeezed her hand, tears falling freely. "Of course I came. There's nowhere else I'd ever be." She tried to smile, her eyes glistening even through the haze of pain. "I knew you would." The doctor entered just then, smiling gently when he saw her awake. "You've got quite the fighter here, Mrs. Brooks. She's going to need rest and physical therapy, but she's out of danger." Those words, "out of danger," were the most beautiful I'd ever heard. For the next few days, I hardly left her side. I helped feed her, brushed her hair when she couldn't lift her arm, and read to her when she couldn't sleep. Ethan was there too, quieter than usual, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline outside her window, Sophie looked at me, her voice still weak but certain. "Mom, you know what I thought about when I was lying there? You." All I could think was, "I needed to tell you that I love you. That I'm sorry again, for everything." I reached over, my hand trembling as I touched her cheek. "You already told me, sweetheart. And I forgave you the moment you called me that night." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're still my hero." I laughed softly through tears. "And you're still my heart." As she drifted back to sleep, I sat watching her breathe, feeling something settle inside me. All the pain, the anger, the years of distance, they didn't matter anymore. In that sterile room, surrounded by the sound of machines and whispered prayers, only love remained. She squeezed my hand, whispering, "I know now what really matters." Sophie's recovery was slow but full of determination. Those first few weeks after she was discharged from the hospital tested both of us. She couldn't lift heavy objects, couldn't drive, and often grew frustrated with how dependent she felt. But every time she started to spiral, I reminded her of how far she'd come. "You survived something that could have taken you," I'd say gently. "Now you just have to keep choosing life one small victory at a time." She stayed with me for the first month of recovery. I converted my spare bedroom into a cozy little sanctuary for her soft blankets, fresh flowers, a small desk by the window. At night, I'd hear her moving around, restless. But eventually, she'd settle. We'd talk for hours, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, filling the quiet with years' worth of lost conversations. One morning, I came into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, her arms still in a sling but a laptop open in front of her. She looked up, smiling. "Guess what?" "What?" I asked, pouring us both coffee. I've been thinking about working again just part-time. But this time, maybe with you. I froze mid-sip. With me? She nodded enthusiastically. At Langston Classics, I can help with the design side branding, customer outreach, whatever you need. I want to be a part of what you're building. For a long moment, I just looked at her, trying to read the sincerity in her eyes. It was there, strong, steady, and real. You sure about this? I asked. The work's not glamorous. You'll get grease under your nails and sweat on your forehead. She grinned. Then it's about time I earned those calluses. So she started coming to the shop again. Slowly at first, answering phones, helping with social media, sketching ideas for our next promotional campaign. The customers loved her energy, and my team welcomed her like family. Trevor started calling her Boss Junior, a nickname that made her laugh every time. It wasn't long before she became indispensable. She created a loyalty program, redesigned our brochures, and even helped us land a big contract restoring a collection of classic convertibles for a luxury resort. Watching her work beside me, focused, passionate, and humble, filled me with indescribable pride. Sometimes I'd glance at her across the shop floor, hair tied up, hands smudged with a hint of dust, and my heart would ache not from pain this time, but gratitude. I had my daughter back, not the version who chased perfection, but the real Sophie, the one who used to sit in the diner booth after school, swinging her legs while I worked. One afternoon, after we finished cleaning up, she looked at me and said, "You know, Mom, I used to think success meant people knowing your name. But here, success feels like peace." I smiled. "That's because real success is quiet. It doesn't need to shout." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then I guess I'm learning from the best." Our bond deepened with every passing day. She started helping with physical tasks again, pushing herself through therapy and slowly regaining her strength. The more time we spent together, the more the shop began to feel like an extension of our relationship once damaged, now beautifully restored. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she said, "You know what we should do? Restore a car together, from start to finish. Something that's ours." I laughed. "You mean on top of everything else you've taken on?" She grinned. "Why not? It'll be our project mother and daughter." We found an old red Corvette that had been sitting in a junkyard for years. It was rusty, dented, and in terrible shape. But Sophie saw potential in it, just like I had seen potential in her when she was little. "It's perfect," she said. "Just needs some love." We worked on it every weekend for months, scrubbing, sanding, painting, and laughing through our mistakes. There were nights we stayed long after sunset, music playing softly in the background, our laughter echoing in the shop. Somewhere in that process, the car became symbolic of us, scarred but resilient, forgotten but reborn. When we finally finished, the Corvette gleamed under the shop lights, its glossy red coat flawless. We took a photo together in front of it, arms around each other, both grinning like fools. A week later, it sold for nearly triple what we expected. We celebrated with champagne, toasting to hard work, forgiveness, and second chances. "I think Mr. Langston would have been proud of us," I said, raising my glass. Sophie smiled. "He left his legacy in the right hands, Mom. And now, you've passed it on to me too." We clinked glasses, laughter and tears blending together in a moment that felt sacred. As weeks turned into months, I started to see something new in her peace. She didn't care about appearances anymore. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. And maybe that was the greatest proof of all, that she had finally come home to herself. Sometimes, customers would watch us working together and say, "You two look more like sisters than mother and daughter." We'd laugh, but I knew what they really saw wasn't youth or resemblance, it was connection. A connection forged in pain, tested by pride, but ultimately redeemed by love. That night, as I closed the shop after everyone had gone home, I ran my hand over the Corvette's empty space on the floor. It wasn't just a car we'd restored, it was a piece of our souls. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, life had finally come full circle. And as I watched her laughter fill the shop, I knew we were finally rewriting our story. On the 1-year anniversary of her wedding, Sophie called me early in the morning. I was getting ready for work when my phone buzzed on the counter. Her name lit up the screen, and I smiled as I answered. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early." Her voice was soft but full of something I couldn't quite place: nervous excitement. "Morning, Mom. I need you to meet me somewhere today. It's really important." I raised an eyebrow. Important, like business important? Or important like Mom? Bring tissues important? She laughed quietly. "Definitely the second one. I'll text you the address. Just, please come." An hour later, I found myself driving toward a familiar part of town. When I turned the corner and saw where the GPS was leading me, my breath caught in my throat. It was Street Matthews Church, the same place she had gotten married. For a moment, I froze. The memories from that day flashed in my mind: the pain, the rejection, the sight of her in her gown as I sat across the street in silence. My heart started to race. But before I could even think about turning the car around, Sophie stepped out from the church doors, waving. She was wearing a simple white dress, not a wedding gown, just something soft and elegant. Her smile was warm, not forced or rehearsed like the last time I'd seen her there. "Mom," she called, walking toward me. "You came." I got out slowly, still unsure. "Sophie, what is this?" She took my hand. "Come inside, please. You'll understand." Inside, the church was empty except for Ethan, who stood at the altar in a crisp suit, and a few close friends from Sophie's side. Soft music played through the speakers, something classical, gentle, almost reverent. I turned to Sophie, confused. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" "Mom, I wanted to redo my wedding day. Not the whole thing, just the part that mattered most. The part I got wrong." Before I could speak, she took both of my hands in hers. "I should have had you walk me down the aisle, Mom. I was so afraid of being judged that I missed out on the most beautiful moment of my life. I want to fix that now, if you'll let me." My throat tightened, and tears burned behind my eyes. "Sophie," she smiled through her own tears. "Please, Mom, walk me down the aisle this time, the way it should have been." I could barely speak, but I nodded. She looped her arm through mine, and we turned toward the aisle. Ethan was smiling, and the few guests were wiping tears from their eyes. As we began walking, my heart pounded not from nerves, but from gratitude. Each step felt like healing. I looked at Sophie beside me, radiant in her simplicity, and thought of the little girl who used to cling to my hand crossing the street. When we reached the altar, she turned to me and said softly, "Thank you for never giving up on me." Ethan stepped forward, taking her hands. "We wanted to renew our vows," he said, looking at me with sincerity. "And we couldn't do that without you here, Mrs. Brooks. You're part of what made Sophie who she is." The ceremony was short but heartfelt. They spoke not of wealth or appearances, but of gratitude, humility, and love. When Ethan said, "I promise to honor not just you, but where you come from," Sophie's tears flowed freely. When the officiant finished, Sophie turned to me and hugged me so tightly that I could feel her heartbeat against mine. "You're my rock, Mom," she whispered. "And I want the world to see that." Afterward, we all stood outside the church, laughing and taking photos. It wasn't a grand affair, no photographers, no expensive decorations. Just a few close friends, the afternoon sun, and love that finally felt pure. At one point, Sophie asked a passerby to take a photo of the three of us, me, her, and Ethan, standing together in front of the church doors. As the shutter clicked, she looked over at me and said, "Now that's the wedding photo I'll frame." Later, we went to lunch at a small cafe nearby. She insisted on paying, joking that it was about time she treated me. Between bites, she kept reaching over to squeeze my hand, as if to reassure herself that I was really there. "Mom," she said at one point, "I've realized something. You were right all along. The things I used to chase don't mean anything without people who truly love you. I thought money could buy acceptance, but love is the only thing that can't be bought." I smiled softly. "I think you've finally learned what life's really about." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "You taught me that. You always did, I just took a long time to listen." When the day ended, she hugged me goodbye outside the cafe. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For forgiving me. For walking with me again literally and figuratively. I laughed through tears. I'd walk beside you anywhere, Sophie. Always. As I drove home that evening, the sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and rose, just like the one I'd watched from afar the day she first got married. But this time I didn't feel left out. I felt whole. I rolled down the window and let the wind rush against my face, a smile spreading slowly. Life had a way of coming back around, of rewriting the parts we once thought were ruined. For the first time, I felt seen not for my success, but for my strength as a mother. Life after that ceremony felt peaceful in a way I hadn't known before. For years I had lived waiting for storms, emotional ones, financial ones, heartbreaks that seemed to never end. But now, my life felt like a calm lake at sunrise, still, beautiful, and full of reflection. Sophie and I had found something rare, not just forgiveness, but friendship. She came to the shop regularly, not out of guilt anymore, but because she loved being there. She'd bring coffee for everyone and talk to clients like she'd been part of the business from the start. Watching her interact with customers, laughing, learning, and shining in her own way, made my heart swell. One afternoon, she showed up carrying a stack of papers. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down my polishing cloth. She grinned. "An idea. I've been thinking about how many single moms come through here, women just like you once were. What if we started something to give back? A program, maybe. Something that offers job training or scholarships." I stared at her, stunned. "You want to start a foundation?" "Exactly," she said, eyes bright. "You've already changed lives, Mom. You just don't realize it. I want to help you do it on a bigger scale." The idea took off faster than either of us expected. Within months, we'd started a community project called Second Gear, a small initiative that offered part-time jobs and training to single mothers interested in learning auto restoration. It was simple at first, but it grew quickly. Local newspapers even wrote about it, calling it a story of redemption and empowerment. Every time I read those words, I smiled quietly. Because that's exactly what it was, not just my redemption, but Sophie's too. She began speaking at small community events, sharing our story not to seek attention, but to remind others that forgiveness and change were possible. Watching her stand on stage, confidently speaking about our journey, brought tears to my eyes every time. "My mom taught me what real strength looks like," she'd say to the crowd. "She taught me that wealth isn't in your bank account, it's in your heart, your resilience, and your ability to love even when it hurts." Hearing those words, I knew she wasn't the same woman who once hid me out of shame. She had grown into someone I deeply admired. Ethan supported her every step of the way, too. He'd come to our shop events, help clean up afterward, and always made sure I knew how grateful he was. "I don't think Sophie would be the woman she is now without you, Lillian," he told me once. "You raised her to be strong enough to grow, even if it took a few mistakes to get there." I smiled and replied, "Mistakes are just the universe's way of rerouting us toward what really matters." Over time, our little project flourished. We trained more than a dozen women in the first year. Some became mechanics, others started businesses of their own. Seeing them transform, watching hope bloom where despair once lived, was like watching versions of my younger self finding light again. One evening, Sophie and I were closing up the shop after a long day when she leaned against a car hood and said, "You know, Mom, sometimes I think all of this happened for a reason. Maybe I had to lose myself for a while so I could find you again." I smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face. "And maybe I had to lose you for a while so I could find myself." She laughed softly. "Then I guess we both won in the end." After that, life settled into a rhythm I cherished. We'd work together during the day, have dinner with Ethan in the evenings, and plan community events on weekends. There were no more secrets, no more pretending, just honesty, laughter, and a bond stronger than it had ever been. Even Ethan's family, who had once looked down on me, started inviting me to their gatherings. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to reopen that chapter. But Sophie insisted. "They need to see you, Mom. They need to see who you really are." So I went. and to my surprise, they welcomed me warmly. One of his aunts even pulled me aside and said, "Sophie's lucky to have you, you've raised her beautifully." It was strange how life worked. The same people who once judged me were now offering praise. But I didn't hold it against them. I had learned that resentment only keeps you chained to the past. Forgiveness, on the other hand, sets you free. Months turned into a year, and our foundation grew into something much bigger than we'd imagined. We partnered with local colleges, hosted fundraisers, and even started teaching workshops. Sophie's passion was unstoppable, and her energy was infectious. One night, after a big community event, we were cleaning up when Sophie suddenly turned to me, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I have something to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it, sweetheart?" She took my hand and placed it on her stomach. "You're going to be a grandmother." For a second, the world tilted. Then I laughed, a full, joyful laugh that echoed through the empty hall. "Sophie, oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." She hugged me tight, crying and laughing at the same time. "I was scared to tell you. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted it to be perfect." I held her face in my hands. "There's nothing more perfect than this. You've given me everything I could ever ask for." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about how far we'd come from that painful phone call before her wedding to this moment, where she was building a family grounded in round love, not appearances. Life had come full circle. I wasn't just Sophie's mother anymore. I was her partner, her friend, her guide. And soon, I would be something even more magical, a grandmother. And one day, when Sophie said she was expecting her first child, I knew my story had come full circle. Holding my newborn granddaughter in my arms, I reflected on how far life had brought us. Her name was Clara, a name Sophie said meant bright and clear. And she was exactly that, tiny, perfect, and glowing with the kind of innocence that only new life carries. I sat in the hospital room, rocking her gently, her soft breaths warming my chest. Sophie slept nearby, exhausted but peaceful, while Ethan stood by the window, smiling down at the two of us with quiet awe. I traced Clara's little fingers with my own and thought about the years that had led to this moment. The tears, the rejection, the forgiveness, the rebuilding. I had once thought my story ended the day Sophie told me I wasn't good enough to attend her wedding. I thought motherhood had failed me. But now, sitting there with this baby in my arms, I realized that wasn't the end at all. It was the beginning of something much deeper. When Sophie woke, she looked over at me and smiled weakly. "She's perfect, isn't she?" I nodded, tears welling up. "She is. You did so good, sweetheart." Sophie's voice trembled as she said, "Mom, I want Clara to know who you are. I want her to grow up hearing stories about how strong her grandmother is, about everything you've done. I want her to be proud of where she comes from." That broke me. All the pain I'd ever felt, all the old wounds I thought had faded, came rushing back, but not with sadness this time. With release. I reached over and brushed her hair back. "Then you tell her the truth, Sophie. Tell her grandmother wasn't perfect, but she loved fiercely. Tell her she fought hard for the people she loved, even when it cost her everything. That's all the legacy I need." In the days that followed, I visited every chance I got. I helped Sophie adjust to motherhood, cooking her meals, rocking the baby so she could rest. Ethan would tease me, saying, "You're going to spoil her." I'd laugh and reply, "That's the grandmother's job." Every time I held Clara, I'd think about the chain of women who had come before us, my mother, who worked herself to the bone for me who did the same for Sophie, and now Sophie, who was determined to give Clara both love and wisdom. The mistakes of the past had turned into lessons passed down through generations. One afternoon, Sophie came to visit the shop with Clara bundled in her arms. The entire team stopped working to coo over the baby. Trevor, now managing part of the business, chuckled. "Looks like we've got our next generation of Langston classics right here." Sophie laughed. "She's already got oil in her veins, I'm sure." Watching them all fuss over Clara filled me with warmth. The shop, once my sanctuary of survival, had become the heart of our family's story. It wasn't just where I found my strength, it was where our future had begun to bloom. As Sophie and I sat in my office later that day, sipping tea while Clara slept in a bassinet beside us. She said quietly, "You know, I used to think love was about perfection, about showing the world how polished your life could look. But I think real love is messy. It's forgiving. It's the kind that survives through every storm." I smiled. "You're absolutely right. Love isn't about looking flawless, it's about never giving up on each other, no matter how flawed we are." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about that day, the wedding day?" I took a deep breath. "Sometimes. But not with pain anymore. That day taught me that you can't force someone to see your worth. You have to live it, breathe it, and let time do the rest." Sophie nodded slowly. "I still hate that I hurt you like that." I reached for her hand. "Sweetheart, forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it just stops it from controlling what comes next. We both learned from it. And now, look at us." She smiled through tears. "You're right, Mom. We made it." That night, after they left, I stayed late at the shop, looking around at all the framed photos lining my office wall. There were pictures of restored cars, of me and the team, of Sophie smiling beside me holding her newborn. Each photo told a piece of a story that had once been filled with sorrow but now overflowed with triumph. I walked outside and looked up at the stars. For the first time, I didn't feel small beneath them. I felt part of something vast, beautiful, and complete. I thought about the night years ago when I'd driven past that church, seeing Sophie in her wedding gown and believing I'd lost her forever. I thought about the loneliness that had followed, the unexpected gift of Mr. Langston's trust, and the way that single act of kindness had changed everything. Sometimes, life takes everything from you so it can give you back something better, something stronger, purer, and real. Now, I wasn't the woman who had been deemed too poor. I was a mother, a business owner, a grandmother, and most importantly, a woman who had found peace on her own terms. When I looked at Clara's picture again before locking up that night, I whispered softly, "You'll never have to wonder if you're enough. You come from a line of women who fought to prove it." I smiled, turning off the lights and closing the door behind me. The shop hummed in the quiet night air, its faint glow reflecting off the polished cars, a reminder of how even the most broken things can shine again. And as I kissed my granddaughter's forehead, I silently thanked the universe for giving me the happy ending I never thought I'd deserve.